The blue substitute. I never imagined that the silence of a nursery could be heavier than concrete, or that the absence of a cry could ring in your ears until you felt like clawing them off. But here I am staring at a closed door, terrified of what lies behind it, terrified of the woman I swore to protect, and even more terrified of the plastic thing she holds against her chest. It started with a silence so profound it felt like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for a permission to exhale that never came. I should have known that when you force a void to fill you, don't get to choose what pours into it. The rain in Seattle is relentless in November. It doesn't wash things clean. It just presses the gray sky down against the rooftops until you feel like you're living inside a bruised lung. That was the atmosphere of our home 3 weeks after we left the hospital with empty arms. The doctors called it a tragedy, a statistical anomaly, a failure to thrive. They used soft words to wrap around the jagged reality that our son Leo had stopped breathing before he ever really started. We walked out of those automatic doors into the parking lot, and the world looked exactly the same as it had when we entered, which felt like the cruelest joke of all. Madison didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She just turned off. It was as if someone had reached into her back and pulled the main breaker. She spent 20 hours a day in our bedroom lying on top of the duvet, staring at a spot on the wall where the paint had a microscopic bubble. She stopped eating. She stopped showering unless I physically guided her to the bathroom and turned the water on. She was a ghost haunting her own life, and I was the caretaker of a mausoleum. I tried everything. I cooked her favorite meals: risotto with truffle oil, roasted chicken with rosemary. But the food would sit on the nightstand until it went cold and congealed, the smell of grease turning nauseating in the stagnant air. I played the indie folk records she used to hum along to while she was pregnant, but the music just seemed to highlight the lack of humming. I read to her. I sat by the bed and read harmless, escapist fiction, trying to build a bridge of words back to reality, but her eyes never moved from that spot on the wall. Grief is not a process. It is a room without doors, and Madison had locked herself in the center of it. The nursery was the worst. We had spent 6 months preparing it. It was painted a soft, calming sage green. The crib was made of sustainable oak assembled with my own hands, every screw tightened with the anticipation of the life it would hold. The mobile above it was a galaxy of felt stars and planets. Now, passing that door felt like walking past a crime scene. I kept the door shut, but the energy of that room seeped under the jamb. It was a vacuum, a black hole in the hallway that sucked the warmth out of the rest of the house. I returned to work after 2 weeks because the silence was driving me insane and we needed the money. I work in medical sales, a job that requires a level of extroverted energy and optimism that felt physically painful to manufacture. I would sit in my car in the hospital parking lots, ironically the places I sold equipment to, and just grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, trying to summon the strength to walk in and smile. Every time I saw a pregnant woman or a new father carrying a car seat, a spike of envy so hot and corrosive would shoot through my gut that I wanted to vomit. It was during one of these lunch breaks, sitting in the rain-battered sedan, that I found the doll. I wasn't looking for it. I was doom-scrolling through social media, numbing my brain with short videos and advertisements, when the algorithm in its twisted wisdom threw a suggestion at me. It was a forum for designer toy collectors. I remembered Madison used to love these things before the pregnancy. She had a small collection of blind box figures on her desk, whimsical, slightly weird little creatures. She called them her little gremlins. She said she liked them because they were cute, but had a bit of an edge, a bit of attitude. The post was about the Labubu series. I didn't get it. They looked like strange rabbits with serrated teeth and mischievous, almost malevolent grins. But the comments were filled with people talking about how much joy they brought, how they were emotional support collectibles. One comment stuck out: "I was going through a divorce, and honestly, just having this little guy on my shelf made me feel less alone. It's like he gets it." Desperation is a powerful hallucinogen. In that moment, staring at the screen of my phone, I convinced myself that this was the key. If I could just spark a single neuron in Madison's brain, if I could just remind her of the person she was before the loss, maybe she would come back to me. I clicked through to eBay. The prices were absurd, driven up by hype and scarcity. I scrolled past the common ones until I saw it. It was a limited edition, the ocean blue Labubu. The color struck me first. It wasn't a bright, happy blue. It was a deep, submerged indigo, the color of the water at the bottom of a well. Its eyes were large and crimson, a stark, violent contrast to the dark blue fur. The mouth was open in that signature jagged grin, revealing rows of small, white, saw-like teeth. It didn't look cute to me. It looked predatory. But the listing description said rare, mint condition. Needs a home that understands silence. The seller's handle was something generic like Toy Hunter 99, but the tone of the listing was odd. No exclamation points, no hype, just facts and that strange final sentence. I stared at the Buy It Now button. $300. A ridiculous amount of money for a piece of vinyl and faux fur. But I thought of Madison's dead eyes. I thought of the cold risotto on the nightstand. I thought of the sage-green nursery gathering dust. We buy things to fill the holes in us, never realizing that some things come with holes of their own. I pressed the button. The package arrived 3 days later on a Tuesday. I remember the day because the rain had stopped for a brief hour, leaving the streets slick and black, reflecting the streetlights like oil. The box was waiting on the porch when I got home from work. It was wrapped in brown butcher paper, taped aggressively. I brought it inside, the cardboard damp from the humidity. The house was quiet as always. I called out, "Maddie, I'm home," but the only answer was the hum of the refrigerator. I walked into the bedroom. She was exactly where I had left her that morning, curled on her side, facing the window. The gray light of dusk washed over her, making her look like a marble statue carved in grief. "I got you something," I said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. She didn't move. She didn't blink. I began to unwrap the package. The sound of tearing paper was jarringly loud in the room. I pulled the box open and lifted the figure out. In person, it was heavier than I expected. The texture of the fur was stiff, not soft, and the vinyl face felt cold and hard. But the detail was impressive. The eyes were unsettling. They were painted with a glossy finish that caught the dim light from the hallway, making them look wet, alive. They weren't looking forward. They seemed to be looking slightly up and to the left, as if tracking something just over my shoulder. "Do you remember these?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "You used to talk about the artist." "Kazinglung, right? I saw this one and, I don't know, it's blue, like that dress you wore on our first anniversary." I held it out to her, suspending it in the air between her grief and my desperation. For a long minute, nothing happened. I felt like an idiot. I was a grown man holding a monster doll in a room that smelled of depression, trying to cure a mother's broken heart with a toy. I began to lower my hand, resignation settling in my chest like lead. Then Madison shifted. It was a small movement, just a twitch of her shoulder. Then her head turned. Her eyes, dull and rimmed with red exhaustion, drifted from the window to the object in my hand. Her gaze locked onto the Labubu's crimson eyes. I watched, holding my breath, as a flicker of recognition or something else sparked in her pupils. She sat up. It was the first time she had sat up on her own in weeks. She reached out her hand, trembling. Her fingers were thin, her skin pale and translucent. She brushed the jagged teeth of the doll. "Blue," she whispered. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping over pavement. It was the first word she had spoken in 12 days. "Yeah." I breathed relief, flooding my veins so hot it made me dizzy. "It's blue. It's for you, Maddie." She took it from me. She didn't hold it like a collector holds a prize. She didn't inspect the paint or check the articulation. She cradled it. She brought it to her chest, tucking its hard, spiky head under her chin, and rocked back and forth. "Hello," she murmured into the plastic ear. "You were lost, weren't you?" I thought it might keep you company," I said, trying to ignore the slight prickle of unease at the way she was holding it. It looked uncomfortable. The doll's ears were long and pointed. They had to be digging into her neck. But she didn't seem to care. "He was lost," she said again, stronger this time. She looked up at me. "Thank you, Mark." She said my name. She looked at me. It was a miracle. I leaned in and hugged her, wrapping my arms around both her and the doll. The hard vinyl pressed against my sternum, a solid barrier between our hearts, but I didn't care. I had my wife back. Or at least, I had a version of her that was functioning. That evening was the best we had had since the hospital. Madison got out of bed. She carried the doll. She hadn't named it yet, just referred to it as him, into the kitchen while I made dinner. She sat it on the counter, positioning it so it faced the stove. "He likes the smell of the onions," she said, cutting a tomato. I chuckled, chopping celery. "Does he? I didn't know goblins had a preference for aromatics." She didn't laugh. She looked at me with a sudden sharp intensity. "He's not a goblin, Mark. Don't call him that." "Right. Sorry," I said, quickly backing down. "The Labubu. Does he have a name?" She looked back at the doll, staring into those glossy red eyes for a long moment. "Zim," she said. "His name is Zim." "Zim. Okay. Zim likes onions." I forced a smile, trying to keep the mood light. We ate dinner at the table. She placed Zim in the empty chair between us, the chair we had bought specifically because it was high enough for a booster seat later on. She angled him so he faced her. Throughout the meal, she kept glancing at him, smiling small, secret smiles. It was strange, yes. It was eccentric. But compared to the catatonic state of the previous weeks, it was heaven. I told myself it was a transition object, a vessel for her displaced nurturing instincts. It was harmless. But later that night, the atmosphere in the house began to shift. It wasn't something I could point to and say, "There, that's wrong." It was a change in density. The air felt thicker, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. We got ready for bed. Madison insisted on placing Zim on the nightstand on her side of the bed. "So he doesn't get lonely in the dark," she explained. "Maddie, he's a toy. He doesn't have feelings," I said, gently pulling back the covers. She froze, her hand still resting on the doll's head. She turned to me, and the look in her eyes sent a cold shiver down my spine. It wasn't anger exactly, it was pity. A deep, condescending pity, as if I were a child who didn't understand how the world worked. "Everything has feelings if you love it enough, Mark," she said. "You just have to listen." She turned off the lamp. I lay in the dark, listening to the rain drum against the roof. I was exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. I was hyper-aware of the shape on the nightstand. In the faint ambient light coming from the street lamps outside, I could just make out the silhouette of the ears. They looked like horns. I must have drifted off eventually because I woke up to a sound. It was soft, barely audible over the rain. A scritch-scratch sound. Like fabric rubbing against fabric or plastic dragging across linen. I opened my eyes, my heart rate instantly spiking. The room was dark, but my eyes had adjusted. I rolled over to check on Madison. She was fast asleep, her breathing deep and even. Then I looked at the nightstand. It was empty. My stomach dropped. I sat up, scanning the room. Had it fallen? I leaned over the edge of the bed to check the floor. Nothing. "Maddie?" I whispered. No answer. I lay back down, confused. Maybe she had moved it. Maybe she had taken it to the bathroom and I hadn't heard her. I turned my head to look at my own pillow, intending to punch it into a better shape. I stopped. The breath caught in my throat. Zim was sitting on my pillow. He was inches from my face. In the darkness, his blue fur was black, blending into the shadows, but I could see the glint of his eyes. They were wide, unblinking, reflecting the faint light from the window. And that mouth, that serrated, jagged grin was hovering right above my nose. I scrambled back, nearly falling off the bed. "Jesus!" Madison stirred. "Mark, what is it?" The doll, I stammered, pointing at my pillow. It's on my face. How did it get there? Madison sat up, rubbing her eyes. She reached over and picked Zim up, cradling him instantly. Oh, you must have knocked him over when you were tossing and turning. I put him between us because I thought you might want to bond with him too. What, you put him on my pillow? No, I put him in the middle. You move around a lot, Mark. You probably pushed him. She stroked the doll's ears, soothing it. It's okay, Zim. Daddy didn't mean to scare you. Daddy is just clumsy. I stared at her. I hadn't moved. I sleep like the dead, especially when I'm this exhausted. I hadn't tossed or turned, and even if I had the physics, didn't make sense. To get from the nightstand to my pillow, he would have had to cross over Madison. Or if she put him in the middle, I would have pushed him off the bed, not up onto the mound of my pillow, sitting upright. He was sitting up, Madison, I said, my voice trembling. He was looking at me. She looked at me in the dark, her face a pale oval. Don't be silly. He's just a doll, Mark. Remember, you said so yourself. He doesn't have feelings. He can't move. She lay back down, pulling the duvet up, tucking the doll inside with her as if it were a toddler. Go to sleep. You're stressed. I lay there, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Plausible deniability. That's what my brain grabbed onto. She must have moved him. She must have done it in her sleep, or she was lying to make me feel better about being scared of a toy. Yes, that was it. Grief makes people do strange things. She wanted me to be close to it, so she put it there. I turned my back to them, facing the door. I closed my eyes, trying to force the image of those serrated teeth out of my mind, but as I drifted toward a shallow, uneasy sleep, I heard it again. A faint, rhythmic sound coming from behind me, from under the covers, where my wife held the substitute for our dead son. It sounded like a purr, but it was too mechanical, too clicky. It sounded like plastic teeth grinding together, click, click, click. I told myself it was the heater. I told myself it was the house settling. I told myself it was anything other than the blue thing with the red eyes. But deep down in the lizard part of my brain that remembers when we were prey in the tall grass, I knew the house wasn't empty anymore. And whatever had filled the void, it was hungry. The silence I had feared was gone, replaced by a noise that was infinitely worse. The silence was just an absence. This was a presence, and it was lying in my bed. The descent into madness didn't happen with a sudden violent crash. It arrived on the scent of lavender baby powder and the soft rhythmic sound of a rocking chair creaking in the dead of night. If part one was the silence of the void, part two was the noise of the infestation. It was the week where I stopped worrying about my wife's grief and started worrying about her soul and perhaps the safety of my own throat. Over the next 10 days, our house transformed from a mausoleum into a grotesque parody of a happy home. The stillness that had suffocated us was replaced by a bustle of activity that was in many ways infinitely more disturbing. Sarah was no longer the catatonic ghost haunting the bedroom. She was active, vibrant, and terrifyingly purposeful. She moved through the hallways with a manic energy, her arms always occupied by the blue, jagged tooth shape of Zim. I watched, paralyzed by a cocktail of guilt and confusion, as the boundaries of reality began to dissolve. It started with the supplies. I came home from work on a Thursday to find the kitchen counter covered in shopping bags. Not groceries, but baby supplies. Diapers specifically designed for premature infants, wipes, bottles, pacifiers, and rows of expensive organic lotions. "Sarah," I asked, putting my keys down the metal, clinking loudly in the sudden quiet. She emerged from the living room, a radiant smile plastered on her face. It was the kind of smile you see in toothpaste commercials, too wide, too bright, and not quite reaching the eyes. She was holding Zim against her hip, bouncing him gently. "Mark, you're home early?" she chirped. She grabbed a bottle of lotion from the counter. "Look, they finally restocked the calming lavender scent. It helps him sleep." I looked at the doll. Its vinyl face remained fixed in that mischievous, predatory grin, its red eyes staring past me. Sarah, he's a doll. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't have skin to absorb lotion." The smile didn't falter, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Don't be dense, Mark. It's about the routine. It makes him feel safe. The texture of the vinyl gets dry in this heating. You have to take care of things you love or they crack. You have to take care of things you love or they crack." The sentence hung in the air, heavy with a double meaning I wasn't sure she intended. I didn't argue. I couldn't. I was the one who had brought the thing into the house. I was the dealer who had given the addict her first hit, and now I had no right to complain about the needle. That night I watched from the doorway of the bathroom as she bathed him. She'd filled the baby tub, the one we had bought for Leo, with warm water. She undressed the doll, removing the little felt outfit it came with, revealing the jointed plastic body underneath. She used a washcloth to gently scrub the blue fur, humming a tune that was dangerously off-key. The sight was visceral. The water turned a murky gray as dust and dye leached from the cheap materials, but she treated it like holy water. She dried him with a fluffy towel, careful not to get soap in those painted red eyes. It was innocent. It was heartbreaking. It was deeply, fundamentally wrong. But the real horror began when the auditory hallucinations started. Or at least I prayed they were hallucinations. I work from home 2 days a week, usually sequestered in my study downstairs. The walls of our house are thick. It's an old craftsman build, but sound travels through the vents. On Tuesday morning, a week after Zim's arrival, I was trying to focus on a spreadsheet, but my concentration was shattered by the sound of voices coming from the living room above me. One voice was Sarah's. It was soft cooing, the motherese tone people use with infants and puppies. "I know, sweetie, I know. He didn't mean it." Pause. "No, Daddy isn't bad. Daddy is just tired. He doesn't see you like I do." Pause. "Shh, don't say that. That's not nice. We don't bite, we only smile." I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. It was a one-sided conversation. I knew that logically. Sarah was projecting, creating a dialogue to fill the silence. But the pauses, they were too perfect. They were the exact length of a response. And in the low hum of the heating vent beneath the sound of Sarah's voice, I swore I heard a sound. It wasn't a voice. It was a friction sound. Scritch, scratch, like rigid fingernails dragging across drywall. Then a low, guttural noise that sounded like a wet cough. I stood up my chair, scraping loudly against the floorboards. The noise upstairs stopped instantly. I walked up the stairs, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. When I entered the living room, Sarah was sitting on the sofa, folding laundry. Zim was propped up on the cushion next to her, facing the television, which was off. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, though I felt a cold sweat prickling on my neck. Sarah looked up, surprised. "Talking to nobody, just humming to myself." "I heard you, Sarah. You were talking about me. You said I was tired. You told him not to bite." Her expression shifted. For a split second, I saw a flash of genuine fear in her eyes, not fear of me, but fear for me. Then it was gone, replaced by a mask of annoyance. "You're hearing things, Mark. The stress is getting to you. I was just singing along to the radio in my head." I looked at Zim. The doll was sitting at an angle I didn't remember. His head was tilted slightly to the left, his ear pointing toward the hallway I had just come from. It felt like he was listening, not with ears, but with an awareness that permeated the plastic. "I'm not crazy, Sarah," I whispered. "No," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, to her eyes locking onto the doll's jagged grin. "You're not crazy. You're just jealous." That was the moment the dynamic shifted. It wasn't just Sarah and me dealing with grief anymore. It was a triangle, and I was the outsider. The escalation hit its peak 3 days later during what I now call the feeding. I had come home late from a site visit, exhausted and starving. The house smelled strange. a mix of the cloying lavender lotion and something else, something organic and rotting, a sweet fermentation smell like garbage left out in the sun. I followed the scent to the kitchen. Sarah was sitting at the breakfast nook. Zim was strapped into the high chair. The high chair we had assembled together, laughing about how complicated the instructions were. Now it held a 12-inch vinyl monster. Sarah had a jar of applesauce open. It was the organic, cinnamon-spiced kind. She held a silver baby spoon, Leo's spoon engraved with his initials, and was pushing a dollop of brown mush toward the doll's face. "Open wide," she whispered. I stood in the doorway, unable to look away. The horror of the scene lay in the mechanics of it. The doll's mouth was molded into a permanent open grin, but it was solid. There was no throat, there was no stomach, there was nowhere for the food to go. Sarah pushed the spoon against the serrated plastic teeth. Click, clack. The applesauce squished against the unyielding vinyl, oozing out the sides of the mouth, dripping down the blue fur of the chin. It smeared over the white teeth, making them look yellow and decayed. "Good boy," Sarah cooed. She pulled the spoon back, scraped the excess sauce from his chin, and tried again. I stepped closer, the smell hitting me full force. The jar of applesauce on the table wasn't fresh. It had been left open. The edges were crusty and dark brown. The bib around Zim's neck was stained with layers of old dried food, orange carrots, green peas, and now the brown applesauce. It was a graveyard of meals that had never been eaten, just smeared onto a plastic idol. "Sarah, stop," I said, my voice shaking. She didn't look at me. She just kept pushing the spoon against the plastic. Scrape, click, squish. "He's hungry, Mark. He's growing. Boys have big appetites." "He's not eating it, Sarah." I snapped, the frustration finally boiling over. I walked over and grabbed her wrist. "Look at him. It's just piling up on his face. It's rotting. You're covering a toy in garbage." She ripped her arm away with a strength that shocked me. She stood up, knocking the chair back. The spoon clattered to the floor, flinging a glob of brown sludge onto my pants. "Don't you dare starve him," she screamed. Her face was contorted, unrecognizable. This wasn't the woman I married. This was a tigress defending her cub. "You want him to die, is that it? You couldn't save Leo, so now you want Zim to die too." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, gasping. "Sarah, how can you say that?" She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving. She positioned herself between me and the high chair, shielding the doll with her body. "He told me you'd say that. He told me you were jealous of his appetite." "He told you?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "Sarah dolls don't talk. They don't eat. We need help." "You need help," she sneered at me. "He talks to those who listen. He eats the love I give him. You're just empty, Mark. You're empty, and you want everyone else to be empty too." She turned back to the doll. With a tenderness that made my stomach churn, she used her thumb to wipe a smear of applesauce from its eye. "It's okay, baby. Daddy is leaving now. Daddy's going to his room." I retreated. I ran. I locked myself in the guest bedroom downstairs and sat with my back against the door, shaking. I could hear her upstairs moving around the kitchen, the soft clink of the spoon resuming its rhythm against the plastic teeth. That night, the boundary between mental illness and reality broke completely for me. I couldn't sleep in the master bedroom anymore. I stayed in the guest room, but the house felt small. It felt like the walls were contracting, pushing me closer to the center, closer to him. Around 3:00 a.m., I woke up. I needed water. My throat was parched from the stress crying I had done earlier. I opened the door quietly, trying not to make a sound. The house was dark, shadows stretching long and distorted across the floorboards. I crept toward the kitchen, passing the nursery door. The nursery door was open. We had kept it closed for months. Sarah had moved Zim into the master bedroom, or so I thought. But now the door stood ajar, revealing a slice of the darkness inside. I shouldn't have looked. I should have kept walking. But curiosity is the trap that catches us all. I pushed the door open gently. The street lamp outside cast a pale, sickly glow through the window, illuminating the room in shades of gray and blue. The crib was in the center. And there, standing inside the crib, gripping the bars with its paws, was Zim. Not lying down, standing. His little blue hands were wrapped around the wooden slats. His head was poking through the bars, looking directly at the door, directly at me. I froze. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Sarah posed him like that. She stood him up to look out. But the balance was impossible. The doll had large, heavy feet and a top-heavy head. To stand on a soft mattress gripping the bars required tension. It required muscle. I took a step into the room. "Zim," I whispered, feeling like an idiot, feeling like a victim in a horror movie who calls out to the monster. The room was freezing, much colder than the hallway. I could see my breath misting in the air. As I stared at the doll, I saw it. It was subtle. If I had blinked, I would have missed it. The doll didn't move its head, it didn't wave, it blinked. The glossy red eyes, which were painted plastic, seemed to slide shut for a fraction of a second and then snap open. A wet, sticky sound accompanied it. Schlick. I stumbled back, hitting the doorframe with my shoulder. Pain shot down my arm, grounding me, telling me this was real. "No," I hissed. "No, no, no." I turned to run, but then I heard the sound from the rocking chair in the corner. The chair Sarah used to sit in for hours while pregnant, dreaming of the future. Creak, creak, creak. The chair was rocking. Empty, but it wasn't empty. As my eyes adjusted to the darker corner, I saw Sarah. She was sitting on the floor behind the chair, huddled in the shadows, her knees pulled up to her chest. She wasn't rocking the chair. The chair was rocking on its own, fueled by a momentum that shouldn't exist. Sarah was watching me. Her eyes were wide, terrified, reflecting the same moonlight as the doll. She had a finger pressed to her lips. "Shh," she hissed, barely audible. "He's practicing." "Practicing what?" I choked out my voice, barely a squeak. "Walking," she whispered. "He wants to come to your room tonight, Mark. He says the guest room bed is too soft for one person." I looked back at the crib. The doll was still there, gripping the bars. But now his mouth seemed wider. The grin had stretched, splitting the vinyl at the corners of the lips, revealing a darkness inside that wasn't there before. I backed out of the room. I slammed the door shut. I didn't care about waking the neighbors. I grabbed the doorknob and pulled it tight. Then I heard it. A sound that made my blood turn to ice and my bladder threatened to release. From inside the nursery, right against the wood of the door I was holding, came a heavy, distinct thud, like a small body jumping from the crib to the floor. Thump. Then the padding of feet, heavy, wet feet slapping against the floorboards. Pad, pad, pad. They stopped right on the other side of the door. I held my breath. I could hear breathing on the other side. Not Sarah's breathing. It was a raspy, clicking wheeze like air being forced through a crushed windpipe. "Mark?" Sarah's voice came from inside the room, but it sounded distant, muffled. "Open the door. Zim wants to show you his trick." "Get away from the door, Sarah!" I yelled, putting my full weight against it. "It's not Sarah," the voice on the other side said. It sounded like Sarah, but the cadence was wrong. It was choppy, staccato, like a recording being played back by a machine that didn't understand the rhythm of human speech. "Sarah is asleep. Zim is awake." I ran. I didn't go to the guest room. I ran to the garage. I grabbed my keys, locked the door leading into the house, and backed my car out into the driveway. I sat there shivering, the heater blasting, staring at the dark windows of my own home. I sat there until sunrise, watching the window of the nursery. I kept telling myself it was a prank, a psychotic break. Sarah was throwing her voice. She was manipulating the doll. It was all her. It had to be her. Because if it wasn't her, then the thing in the crib wasn't just plastic and fur, it was a vessel, and we had filled it with too much sorrow, too much desperation, and now it was overflowing. When the sun finally broke through the gray clouds, casting a weak, watery light over the lawn, I saw the curtain in the nursery window move, just a twitch. A small blue hand pressed against the glass, leaving a smudge. It wasn't a smudge of dirt. Even from the driveway, I could see the color. It was red, fresh, bright red. I knew then that the applesauce wasn't the only thing Zim had been eating, and I knew that my wife wasn't the only one in that house who had lost her mind. Or perhaps she was the only one who saw the truth, and I was the fool for thinking a locked door could keep a ghost out. I needed to go back in. I had to go back in. Sarah was still in there. But as I gripped the door handle of my car, a thought paralyzed me. A thought that was colder than the Seattle rain. What if Sarah isn't the victim? What if she's the mother? And mothers will do anything to feed their children. I turned off the car, took a deep breath of the damp morning air, and walked back toward the front door. The silence was back, but it had changed texture. It wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. Inside, the house smelled of lavender and copper, the smell of blood. I walked into the kitchen, dread pooling in my stomach. The high chair was empty, the spoon was gone. But on the floor leading from the kitchen to the stairs were footprints, small, sticky red footprints. They didn't lead to the nursery. They led to the master bedroom. I stood at the bottom of the stairs looking up into the gloom of the second floor. The stairs creaked not under my weight, but under the weight of something descending. Scritch, scratch, step. The blue substitute was coming down to greet me, and he had brought his mother's scalpel. I realized then that the normalization phase was over. We weren't a grieving family anymore. We were prey. And in the twisted ecosystem of our home, the plastic thing at the top of the stairs had just become the apex predator. The escalation was finished. The hunt had begun. The staircase in our home has 14 steps. I know this because in the agonizing stretch of seconds that followed my return to the house, I counted them. I counted them to keep from screaming. I counted them to anchor myself to a reality that felt like it was rapidly disintegrating into a fever dream. The sound of the scritch-scratch descent had stopped the moment my foot touched the bottom landing, leaving a silence that was heavy, wet, and smelling distinctly of iron. I stood there, gripping the banister, my knuckles white, looking up into the gloom of the second-floor hallway. The Seattle morning light was struggling to penetrate the skylight, casting long, gray shadows that seemed to twitch in the periphery of my vision. "Sarah," I called out. My voice sounded foreign to me, thin, reedy, stripped of the authority I tried to project. There was no answer, just the house settling the wood, groaning under the weight of rain and time. But the smell, the copper tang of blood, was undeniable. It wasn't the stale odor of the garbage I had smelled earlier. This was fresh. It tasted metallic on the back of my tongue. I began to climb. 1 step, 2 steps. My legs felt like they were moving through molasses. Every instinct in my body, every primal alarm bell designed to keep a human alive was screaming at me to turn around, to run out the front door, to get in the car and drive until the gas tank was dry. But love is a terrible tether. I couldn't leave her. Not with that thing. The thought of Sarah alone in the nursery with the blue substitute bleeding, vulnerable to whatever psychosis had taken root in her brain, pushed me forward. When I reached the top of the stairs, the hallway was empty. The door to the master bedroom was closed. The door to the nursery, the room I had seen the hand press against from the driveway, was slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness poured out of it like ink. I moved toward the nursery first. The floorboards creaked under my weight, a sound that felt like a gunshot in the quiet house. I pushed the door open with my fingertips, flinching as the hinges whined. The room was freezing. The window I had seen from the street was indeed cracked open, letting in the damp, chilling wind. But it was the crib that drew my eyes. It was empty. Zim was gone. I scanned the room, my heart rate spiking. The rocking chair was still. The mobile of stars and planets hung motionless. But on the floor near the base of the crib was the source of the smell. It wasn't a body. It was a bowl. One of our ceramic cereal bowls placed neatly on the rug. Inside, sitting in a pool of red liquid, was a piece of raw steak. It looked like a flank steak taken from the package I had bought for dinner 2 nights ago. But it had been chewed, not cut with a knife. Chewed. The edges were ragged torn, and there were teeth marks. small serrated indentations that didn't match a human jaw. They matched the jagged, saw-toothed grin of the vinyl doll. The blood, the juice from the meat had been smeared outward from the bowl, creating the footprints I had seen downstairs. But looking closer, I realized the footprints weren't just chaotic smears. They were deliberate. They circled the bowl, a ritualistic dance around an offering. "He was hungry," a voice said from behind me. I spun around, nearly tripping over my own feet. Sarah was standing in the doorway of the nursery. She was wearing her white silk nightgown, the hem stained with dark spots. Her hair was matted on one side as if she had been sleeping on a wet floor, but her face was terrifyingly calm. It was the face of a serene Madonna, beatific and hollow. In her arms she held Zim. The doll looked different. It wasn't just the trick of the light. He looked fuller. The vinyl of his stomach seemed distended. His blue fur was matted in patches with a sticky dark substance. And around his mouth, that fixed plastic grin was a ring of red. "Sarah," I breathed, backing away until my legs hit the crib. "What did you do?" She looked down at the doll, stroking its ears with a lover's tenderness. "I told you, Mark, he's growing. He needs protein. Applesauce isn't enough for a growing boy." "That's raw meat, Sarah. You're feeding raw meat to a toy." I pointed a shaking finger at the bowl. "This is insane. Look at yourself. You're covered in blood." She glanced down at her nightgown, unfazed. "It's messy work being a mother. You wouldn't understand. You never changed a diaper. You never cleaned up the spit-up." "There is no spit-up," I shouted, the anger finally breaking through the fear. "It's plastic. It's vinyl and paint. It doesn't eat. It doesn't poop. It doesn't love you. It is a piece of trash I bought on eBay for $300 because I wanted you to stop staring at the wall." The moment the words left my mouth, the air in the room changed. The serenity dropped from Sarah's face like a mask shattering on concrete. Her eyes went wide, pupils dilated until they were black holes swallowing the iris. The doll in her arms seemed to vibrate. I swear I heard a low buzzing sound like a hive of wasps disturbed in winter emanating from its chest. "Trash," she whispered. The word came out like a hiss. "Yes, trash," I said, stepping forward, emboldened by my own outburst. "I'm ending this. Give me the doll, Sarah." I reached out. I intended to grab Zim by his long blue ears and rip him from her grasp. I intended to march downstairs, throw him in the fireplace, and burn the nightmare out of our lives. But Sarah was faster, and she was stronger. As my hand closed around the doll's arm, Sarah screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It was a guttural, animalistic shriek that tore at her vocal cords. She didn't pull away. She lunged. Her free hand, the fingers curled into claws, raked across my face. I felt the sting before the pain. Her fingernails, kept long and unkempt over the last few weeks, dug into my cheek and dragged down to my jawline. I staggered back, blinding pain flashing white behind my eyes. I raised my hand to my face and pulled it away slick with blood. My blood. "Don't touch him," she shrieked, clutching Zim so tightly I expected the plastic to crack. "You murderer! You killed Leo, and now you want to kill Zim. I won't let you. I won't let you hurt my baby again." I stared at her, shocked, numbing the pain in my cheek. The accusation hit harder than the physical blow. "I didn't kill Leo," I whispered, my voice breaking. "It was Sid's. It was nobody's fault." "Liar!" she spat. Saliva and madness flew from her lips. "You didn't want him, I heard you thinking it. You worried about money. You worried about your freedom. Zim told me he hears your thoughts, Mark. He hears the black slime in your head." She held the doll up, turning him so he faced me. "Tell him, Zim. Tell him we know what he is." The doll stared at me. The red ring around its mouth made it look like it had just finished a violent meal. And for a second, just a second, the expression on its face shifted. The jagged grin didn't move, but the eyes narrowed. A look of pure, distilled malice radiating from cheap plastic. I backed out of the room. I held my hands up in surrender. Okay, Sarah, I'm going. I'm leaving the room." She didn't stop screaming. She began to chant, rocking back and forth, clutching the doll. Safe, safe, safe. Mama has you. Mama will cut the bad man if he touches you. Safe, safe, safe. I retreated to the hallway, then down the stairs, then into my study. I slammed the heavy oak door and locked it. I sank to the floor, my back against the wood, and pressed my hand to my bleeding cheek. The siege had begun. The hours that followed were a blur of psychological torture. I was a prisoner in my own home, trapped not by bars, but by the terrifying reality of what lay on the other side of the door. I sat in my study, surrounded by blueprints and fabric swatches, the mundane artifacts of my life before the nightmare, trying to formulate a plan. I needed to call for help. That was the logical next step. I needed professionals. Men in white coats with sedatives and soft restraints. I reached for my pocket to get my phone. Empty. I checked my other pocket. Empty. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced my chest. I remembered. Last night. I had left my phone on the kitchen counter to charge. It was out there. With her. With him. I looked at the landline on my desk. We hadn't used it in years, but it was still plugged in. I grabbed the receiver. Dead air. No dial tone. Just a hollow, static silence. She had unplugged it, or worse, she had cut the line. The realization that Sarah, my gentle kindergarten teacher wife, was capable of such strategic isolation was more terrifying than the violence itself. It meant she wasn't just reacting, she was planning, or something was planning for her. I went to the window. It was bolted shut. I could break it, yes. I could smash the glass, climb out into the rain, and run to the neighbors. But then what? Leave her alone in here? What if she hurt herself? What if she burned the house down? The guilt, that heavy, suffocating blanket that had covered me since Leo died, weighed me down. I couldn't abandon her. I had to de-escalate. I had to wait for her to sleep. So I waited. The afternoon dragged on. The rain intensified, hammering against the window pane like handfuls of gravel. The light in the study faded from gray to a bruised purple, then to black. I listened. For hours I heard nothing. No footsteps, no screaming, just the rain. The silence was worse than the noise. In the silence, my mind began to eat itself. I started to question the events of the morning. Did the doll really blink? Did I really see raw meat? Or was it just spilled sauce and shadows? Maybe I was the one having the breakdown. Maybe the grief had finally snapped my mind, and I was projecting my own self-hatred onto an inanimate object. Around 6:00 p.m., a shadow fell across the crack at the bottom of the door. I held my breath. "Mark!" It was Sarah. Her voice was soft again, normal. The demonic screeching was gone, replaced by a tone of utter exhaustion and remorse. "Mark, please open the door. I'm so sorry." I didn't move. "You scratched me, Sarah. You're bleeding." I know, baby. I panicked. I don't know what happened. I think I had a panic attack. Please, I put Zim away. He's in the closet. I just want to talk to you. I made you tea. Chamomile. Please." I hesitated. The longing to believe her was overwhelming. I wanted my wife back. I wanted this to be over. "Is the doll really in the closet?" I asked. "Yes, locked in. I promise. I don't want him anymore, Mark. He scares me too. I think you were right. I think there's something wrong with me." She began to cry. Soft, muffled sobs through the wood. That broke me. I stood up, my legs cramping from hours of sitting. I unlocked the door. Sarah stood there. She had changed out of the bloodied nightgown into jeans and a sweater. Her hair was brushed. Her eyes were red from crying, but clear. She held a steaming mug of tea in her hands. "I'm so sorry," she wept. I pulled her into a hug, careful of the tea. She felt frail in my arms, bird-like. "It's okay," I lied. "We'll get help. Tomorrow we'll call Dr. Evans." "Tomorrow," she agreed, nodding into my chest. "Here, drink this. You look pale." She handed me the mug. I took it. The warmth seeped into my cold hands. I took a sip. It was sweet hot and tasted of chamomile and honey. It tasted like forgiveness. We sat on the couch in the living room. It felt surreal, like a ceasefire in a war zone. Sarah was quiet, staring at her hands. I finished the tea, feeling the tension slowly drain from my muscles. Too slowly. or maybe too quickly. A heavy, unnatural drowsiness began to settle behind my eyes. My limbs felt heavy, detached. I looked at the empty mug, then at Sarah. "Did you put something in this?" I slurred. Sarah looked up. Her expression hadn't changed. She was still sad, still crying. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking over my shoulder. "I had to Mark," she whispered. "He said you wouldn't understand the ritual unless you were calm." Ritual? My tongue felt like it was 2 sizes too big for my mouth. The room began to spin. The shadows in the corners stretched and warped, forming jagged shapes. "He needs a father," Sarah said, her voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. "Every boy needs a father to show him the way. You rejected him. So now you have to be initiated." I tried to stand up. My legs collapsed under me. I slumped back onto the couch, my head lolling to the side. From the hallway shadows, a small blue shape emerged. It walked. It didn't walk like a human. It walked with a jerky, stop-motion gait. Click-drag, click-drag. Its plastic feet slapped against the hardwood. It stopped in the middle of the room, staring at me. Zim. He was holding something in his hand, something metallic. "Nighty-night, Daddy," Sarah whispered. She leaned forward and kissed my forehead. Her lips were ice cold. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was the doll raising its arm, the scalpel glinting in the dim light, mimicking a wave. Waking up was not a return to consciousness. It was a slow, agonizing drag from the bottom of a deep, dark ocean. My head throbbed with a chemical hangover that tasted of crushed pills and iron. My mouth was dry as sandpaper. I tried to move my hand to rub my eyes. I couldn't. I pulled harder. The resistance was absolute. Panic, sharp and immediate, cut through the fog of the drugs. I opened my eyes. I was in our bedroom, the master suite. The room was illuminated only by the bedside lamp on Sarah's side, a soft yellow glow that cast long, grotesque shadows against the walls. I was lying on my back in the center of the bed. My arms were pulled wide, tied to the bedposts. My legs were spread-eagle, secured to the footboard. The bonds weren't rope. They were strips of fabric, soft pastel yellow and green fabric. I recognized the pattern. It was the fabric from the baby blankets we'd received at the baby shower. The irony was a physical weight. I was restrained by the very symbols of the life we were supposed to have. "Sarah," I croaked. My voice was a wreck. "Shh." She was there, standing at the foot of the bed. She had changed again. She was wearing a black dress, the one she wore to funerals. Her hair was pulled back tightly, exposing the severe lines of her face. She looked like a priestess of some forgotten, terrible religion. "The ceremony is starting," she said softly. "Sarah, untie me. Please, this isn't you." "It is me," she replied, walking slowly around to the side of the bed. "This is who I am now. I am the mother, and you are the sacrifice, or the father. It depends on your choice." She reached onto the nightstand. The metal tray from our first aid kit was there. Lying on it was the scalpel. It was a disposable surgical blade, razor-sharp, designed to cut through skin with minimal resistance. Beside it was a bottle of rubbing alcohol and a roll of gauze. "Where is it?" I whispered, dread pooling in my stomach. I scanned the room for the blue nightmare. "He's waiting," she said. "He wants to be close to your heart." She leaned down and picked something up from the floor, something I couldn't see. Then with a grunt of exertion she lifted it and placed it directly onto my chest. The weight was shocking. It wasn't the weight of a 12-inch doll. It felt heavy, dense, like a bag of wet sand. Zim sat on my sternum. He was facing me. His legs were splayed out on my chest. His hands rested on my collarbones. Up close under the yellow light of the lamp, the details were horrific. The blue fur was matted with dried blood and bits of meat. The smell was overpowering, a stench of rotting beef lavender and something musky like a wet animal. But it was the face that paralyzed me. The eyes were no longer just painted plastic. They had depth. I could see capillaries. I could see a wet film blinking over the red iris. And the mouth. The mouth was twitching. The serrated teeth were grinding together, making a sound that vibrated through my rib cage. Grr! Click! Grr! He's beautiful, isn't he? Sarah asked, stroking the doll's back. Get it off me, I gagged. Sarah, please get it off me. He's angry, Mark, Sarah said, ignoring my plea. She picked up the scalpel. The light caught the edge of the blade. He says you have a cold heart. He says you didn't cry for Leo. He says a father who doesn't bleed for his son isn't a father at all. She leaned over me. Her face was inches from mine. I could smell the stale tea on her breath. You have to prove it, she whispered. Prove what? I cried, straining against the bonds until my wrists burned. That you bleed, she said. She lowered the scalpel. I screamed. I thrashed. But I was helpless. She placed the tip of the blade against the skin of my neck, just above the collarbone, right next to where the doll's hand rested. Don't move, she commanded. Or I'll hit the artery. I just want the surface, just a offering. I froze. Tears leaked from my eyes, hot and stinging. Sarah, don't, please. She pressed down. The pain was sharp, hot and precise. I felt the skin part. I felt the warm trickle of blood slide down my neck. See, Sarah cooed, you have red inside you too. She dipped her finger into the blood welling on my neck. Then with a reverence that made me want to vomit, she painted a line of blood onto the doll's forehead. Blood of the father, she chanted. The doll reacted. I felt it. I felt the chest of the doll expand against my own. It took a breath, a ragged, hitching breath. The hands on my collarbones tightened. The plastic fingers dug into my flesh, not with the rigidity of a mold, but with the grip of a living hand. He accepts it, Sarah gasped, her eyes shining with ecstasy. He accepts you. She pulled the scalpel away. Now, the final step, the acceptance. She looked at me, her face hard. Kiss him. What? Kiss your son. Kiss Zim. Show him affection. If you don't, she raised the scalpel again, hovering it over my eye. If you don't, he'll take what he wants. I looked at the doll. The face was inches from mine. The smell of rot was suffocating. The jagged teeth were parted, revealing a dark, wet gullet that shouldn't exist in a toy. Do it, she screamed. I closed my eyes. I couldn't look at those red eyes. I craned my neck up. I felt the cold, sticky plastic against my lips. I felt the serrated teeth scrape against my skin. I kissed the monster. And in that moment of contact, a horror beyond comprehension washed over me. The lips of the doll weren't hard vinyl. They were soft. They were warm. And they moved. The doll kissed me back. A small, wet tongue, rough like a cat's, slid out from the jagged teeth and licked my lip. I screamed into the kiss. I gagged, retching, slamming my head back against the pillow. He loves you. Sarah shrieked, clapping her hands. He loves his daddy! The distraction. This was it. The sheer insanity of her joy was the only opening I would get. Yes! I choked out, fighting the bile rising in my throat. Yes, I love him. I love Zim. He's amazing. Sarah, untie me. Let me hold him. I want to hold my son. Sarah stopped clapping. She looked at me, suspicion warring with hope in her eyes. You really mean it? I felt him, I lied, pouring every ounce of desperation into my voice. I felt him kiss me. He's real, Sarah. He's real, and I want to hold him. Please, let us be a family. She hesitated. She looked at the doll, then at me. The delusion was stronger than her caution. She wanted to believe. She needed to believe. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Family hug. She put the scalpel down on the nightstand. She reached for the knot on my left wrist. Her fingers worked quickly, loosening the fabric. As soon as the loop was loose enough, I didn't wait. I didn't wait for her to untie the other hand. I didn't wait for permission. I yanked my left hand free. I grabbed the heavy glass lamp from the nightstand. Sarah looked up, her eyes widening. Mark! I swung. I didn't aim for her head. I couldn't do it. Even in this nightmare, I couldn't kill my wife. I aimed for the arm holding the doll. The base of the lamp connected with her forearm with a sickening crunch. Sarah screamed a high, thin sound of shock and pain. Her grip loosened. Zim fell from her arms, tumbling onto the bed beside me. I grabbed the scalpel with my free hand. I slashed at the bonds on my right hand. The blade was sharp. The fabric parted instantly. I slashed at my legs. "No, no," Sarah wailed, clutching her broken arm. "Zim, catch him, kill him." The doll on the bed moved. It didn't just tumble, it scrambled. It righted itself on the mattress, turning toward me. It hissed a sound like high-pressure steam escaping a valve. It leaped. I rolled off the bed, hitting the floor hard. The doll landed where my head had been a split second before, its claws tearing through the pillowcase, shredding feathers into the air. I scrambled to my feet. Sarah was trying to grab me with her good arm, but she was sobbing, blinded by pain. I shoved past her, knocking her back onto the bed. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I gasped. I ran. I ran out of the bedroom down the hall, leaving the screams of my wife and the inhuman shrieks of the blue substitute behind me. I hit the stairs. I tripped halfway down, tumbling the last few steps, wrenching my shoulder. I didn't feel it. Adrenaline was the only thing in my veins. I got to the front door. I fumbled with the deadbolt. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn the latch. Thump, thump, thump behind me on the stairs. The sound of heavy, wet feet descending. Fast. I threw the door open. The cold, rainy night air hit me like a slap in the face. I ran out into the darkness, barefoot, bleeding from the neck, leaving the house that had become a mouth, leaving the woman I loved to the monster she had nursed to life. I didn't stop running until I reached the neighbors' porch lights, hammering on their door until my fists bruised, screaming for them to call the police, to bring guns to burn it all down. But as I stood there, shivering in the rain, looking back at my dark house across the lawn, I saw it. In the window of the master bedroom. 2 silhouettes. One was Sarah, clutching her arm. The other was small, standing on the windowsill, pressing its face against the glass. Its eyes glowed red in the darkness. It raised a hand. And slowly, deliberately, it waved goodbye. The lights of the police cruisers were the only things that pierced the relentless Seattle gloom, a chaotic strobe of red and blue that danced across the wet pavement of the driveway. I sat on the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket wrapped around my shoulders, shivering violently. It wasn't the cold, it was the adrenaline crash, leaving me hollowed out and shaking like a leaf in a gale. A paramedic was tending to my neck, her face pinched with concern as she applied antiseptic to the shallow slice Sarah had carved into my skin. "You're lucky," she murmured, her voice detached and professional. "Another millimeter and she would have nicked the jugular." I didn't answer. I was staring at the front door of my house. They brought her out 5 minutes later. It took 3 officers to restrain her. Sarah, who used to struggle to open a jar of pickles, was fighting with the strength of a cornered animal. She wasn't screaming in fear. She was screaming in rage. She was screaming for him. "Don't take him, he's cold. He needs his blanket." Her voice was raw, shredded by hours of chanting and shrieking. As they wrestled her toward the second ambulance, she locked eyes with me. There was no recognition in that gaze. No love. No apology, just a pure, distilled hatred that froze the blood in my veins. "Traitor!" she spat, lunging against the cuffs. "You let them take our son. You let them take Zim." One of the officers, a young rookie who looked terrified, was carrying an evidence bag. Inside, visible through the clear plastic, was the blue Labubu doll. It looked inert, just a toy, a lump of vinyl and faux fur. The flashing lights reflected off its glossy red eyes, making them blink in a stroboscopic rhythm. It wasn't moving. It wasn't hissing. It was just a piece of plastic that had destroyed my life. But as the officer walked past me, I felt a wave of nausea so potent I nearly retched. I smelled it again, that impossible scent of lavender, rotting meat, and wet animal musk wafting from the sealed bag. I looked away. I couldn't bear to see it. I couldn't bear to think that for a split second in that bedroom I had felt a tongue against my lips. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal bureaucracy and sterile hospital waiting rooms. The diagnosis came swiftly, delivered by a team of psychiatrists who spoke in low, sympathetic tones. Acute psychotic break, Capgras delusion, complicated grief disorder manifesting in severe dissociation. They told me Sarah had created an alternate reality to survive the trauma of losing Leo. They told me the doll was just a focal point, a screen onto which she projected her fractured psyche. They explained the strength, the violence, the voice changes, all symptoms of the brain, firing in chaotic, desperate patterns. "It's a tragedy," the lead doctor said, clicking his pen. "But with medication and intensive therapy, we can pull her back. However, for her safety and yours, we recommend a long-term facility. There's a specialized center in Florida that deals with postpartum psychosis and grief trauma." I agreed to everything. I signed the papers. I declined to press charges for the assault. How could I put my wife in prison for being sick? How could I blame her when I was the one who bought the damn thing? I visited her once before they transferred her. She was sedated, sitting in a wheelchair by a window overlooking a parking lot. She looked frail, diminished. The manic energy was gone, replaced by a hollow vacancy. "Sarah?" I whispered, sitting across from her. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes drifted over my face, lingering on the bandage on my neck. She didn't blink. "Where is he?" she asked softly. "He's gone, Sarah. It's just us now." She shook her head, a microscopic movement. "No, he's not gone. He's waiting. He said he would wait for the box." "What box?" She didn't answer. She just turned back to the window and began to hum that lullaby, the one she used to sing to the empty crib. The melody sent a spike of ice through my chest, and I left the room before I broke down. That was the last time I saw her. 2 weeks later, I was back in the house. I shouldn't have gone back. Everyone told me to sell it as is, to hire movers and never step foot inside again. But I had to pack. I had to purge. I needed to scrub the house of the memories before I could let it go. The house was silent. The blood had been cleaned up by a biohazard crew I hired, but the smell of bleach hung heavy in the air, masking the phantom scent of copper. I spent the day packing boxes, moving mechanically from room to room. I saved the nursery for last. I stripped the crib. I took down the mobile. I threw the organic lotions and the diapers into a trash bag. I was trying to erase him. I was trying to erase the blue stain from my life. Around 4:00 p.m., a courier van pulled into the driveway. The driver walked up to the porch, holding a medium-sized cardboard box. "Delivery for Mark Miller." I signed for it, my hands trembling slightly. The return address was the police precinct, property of Sarah Miller. I brought the box into the kitchen and set it on the counter. I stared at it for a long time. I knew what was inside. Her clothes from that night, her personal effects, and him. The police had released the personal property because it wasn't needed for a trial that wasn't happening. I should have thrown it in the trash immediately. I should have doused it in gasoline in the driveway. But a morbid, paralyzing curiosity took hold of me. The doctor said it was just a doll. The police said it was just a toy. If I opened it, if I looked at it in the cold light of day, sober and sane, maybe I could banish the monster. Maybe I could prove to myself that it was all just a shared delusion. I grabbed a box cutter. I sliced the tape. I opened the flaps. Lying on top of a folded, blood-stained white nightgown was Zim. He looked innocuous. The blue fur was matted and stiff where the food had dried, but otherwise he was just a figure. I reached out and poked his stomach. Hard vinyl. Cold, unyielding. I tapped his teeth. Plastic. "See?" I whispered to the empty kitchen, my voice shaking. "Just plastic. You're losing it, Mark." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for a month. It was over. It was just a sad, dirty toy. I closed the box. I didn't want to look at it anymore. I taped it shut again, using half a roll of duct tape. I carried it upstairs to the master bedroom, the only room I hadn't fully packed yet, and shoved it deep into the back of the walk-in closet. I piled old coats and shoeboxes in front of it. Out of sight, out of mind. I would throw it in the dumpster tomorrow morning when the junk removal guys came. Night fell. The house, stripped of furniture and rugs, echoed with every sound. The rain started again, tapping against the roof like impatient fingers. I set up a sleeping bag in the living room downstairs. I couldn't sleep in the master bedroom, not after the ritual. I sat on the floor drinking whiskey from a paper cup, trying to drown the silence. But the silence in this house was never truly empty. It was a heavy, watching silence. Around 2:00 a.m. I heard it. At first I thought it was the house settling, a creak from the floorboards upstairs, but then it became rhythmic. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. I froze, the cup of whiskey pausing halfway to my mouth. I stopped breathing. I strained my ears, praying it was a branch against the window. Scritch, scratch. It was coming from upstairs, from the master bedroom, from the closet. It sounded like fingernails digging into cardboard, persistent, frantic. Scritch, scratch, tear. The sound of tape being ripped. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. No, I thought. No, that's impossible. I used half a roll of duct tape. A rat couldn't chew through that. A person would struggle with that. Then came the thud. A heavy, dull thud, like a weight dropping from a shelf to the floor. Then the padding sound. Pad, pad, pad. Wet, flat feet slapping against the hardwood floor of the bedroom upstairs. They moved from the closet to the top of the stairs. I stood up, backing away toward the front door. I fumbled for my car keys in my pocket. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "I have a gun." I didn't have a gun. I had a box cutter and a terrifying realization that I was about to die. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. For a long, agonizing minute there was nothing. Just the rain. Just my heart thudding in my ears. Then a voice drifted down the stairs. It wasn't Sarah's voice. It wasn't the demonic, distorted voice she had used during the attack. It was a child's voice, small, high-pitched, trembling. "Daddy!" I clapped my hands over my ears. "No, no, no, no. Daddy, it's dark," the voice called out. It sounded wet, bubbling, as if the speaker had a mouthful of fluid. "Mommy went away. Why did you put me in the box?" "You're not real!" I screamed, backing into the front door. "You are a piece of plastic." "I'm hungry, Daddy," the voice whined. The tone shifted, dropping an octave, becoming guttural and grinding. "Applesauce isn't enough. I need warmth." Click, click, click. The sound of plastic claws tapping on the wooden steps. He was coming down. I turned and fumbled with the lock. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the keys. "Daddy, look at me!" The voice shrieked now, right behind me at the bottom of the stairs. "Look at your son!" I didn't look. I didn't turn around. I knew if I turned around, if I saw that blue thing standing there with a scalpel or just its jagged teeth, my mind would shatter permanently. I knew if I saw it moving on its own, undeniable and alive, I would never recover. I grabbed the deadbolt, wrenched it open, and threw myself out into the rain. I ran to my car, leaving the front door wide open. I jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life. As I threw the car into reverse, the headlights swept across the front of the house. Through the open front door, standing in the foyer, was a small silhouette. It was about a foot tall. It had long ears. And in the harsh glare of the headlights, two red points of light glowed like burning coals. It raised a hand, a small blue hand, and it waved. I didn't stop driving until I hit the state line. I didn't go back for my clothes. I didn't go back to sell the house. I let the bank foreclose on it. I let them take everything. I live in a small apartment in Chicago now. I don't have closets. I keep my clothes on racks in the open. I don't buy toys. I don't visit toy stores. I haven't heard from Sarah in months. The doctors say she's nonverbal now. She just sits in her room, rocking back and forth, holding a pillowcase she's tied into a knot, whispering to it. But sometimes late at night when the city is quiet, I hear things. I hear scratching inside my walls. I hear the click of plastic on laminate flooring. They say grief is a process. They say it fades with time. But they are wrong. Grief is a doorway, and if you keep it open too long, if you feed it too much attention, if you pour too much of your soul into the void, something will notice. Something will crawl out of the dark to fill the empty space. I burned the photos of Leo, I burned the photos of Sarah, but I can't burn the memory of that kiss. So here is my warning to you. If you buy a Labubu or any doll and you catch it looking at you from an angle you didn't place it in, don't blink. Don't look away. And for the love of God, don't give it a name. Because once you name it, you give it permission to answer. And trust me, you do not want to hear what it has to say.